Hi everyone. I wanted to go over the bouncing rectangles assignment a little bit. A lot of people did some really good work, and I know some people had some questions about some of the extensions or extras that I talked about. So let's go. So here's what I have in mind so far. I just have my little rectangle in the middle, my big ones around the outside, and when I hit run, you're going to see that everything moves around. The way I just have it right now is if I get hit by one, it starts over, it goes to lose world. So that's it. All right, so let's make some enhancements here. Or actually, before we do that, let's look at the code. So in my world, you can see that what I do is I place four of the exact same rectangle on the screen in different locations, each of the corners. And then I put one of the hero rectangles right in the middle. So notice I don't have to have four different enemies. I have one different enemy class and I use it over and over again. Okay, so if I go into here, what we see is the movement for the rectangle, and it says, and remember the act method happens over and over again, it says change the location of the rectangle by adding whatever x move is to the x coordinate and subtracting whatever y move is from the y coordinate. So remember, set location sets the location to two coordinates. This is the first coordinate, and this is the second one. So if get x is less than 5, or get x is greater than 595. So what that means basically is if it bounces off of this wall or off of this wall, then we take the value of x move and we multiply it by -1 and replace it. So basically, if this happens, we're going to take this value and multiply it by -1, and so now this value is going to become -4. So think about that for a minute. If x move is 4, that means that I am adding x move to the x coordinate. So if x move is 4, all of these would start moving that way. So do they? Take a look at this. I'll run it one more time. Do all of the rectangles move to the right? Yes, they do. But what happens is as soon as one of those rectangles bounces off of the wall, as soon as the x coordinate gets to be bigger than 595, then I multiply that value by the x move value by -1, and it means they start going the other way. See? And then I have the exact same thing here for the y value. It says if the y value gets so low that it's basically bouncing off of the top wall, so this here would mean if the y value gets if it goes too high, or if the y value gets too low, same thing. Or if the y value gets too big. So if the y value gets too big, that means it's bouncing off of this wall, and in either case, we flip the sign. So if it hits this wall, instead of, if I have, so in my code, you can see that I'm subtracting the y move value. So that means all of the rectangles, they should start moving up, do they? Yes, they do. So as soon as this rectangle hits the top, the y move value would get multiplied by -1, and it would switch, and it would become positive, start moving the other way, like that. So that's the essence of the game. You just have to switch this value when it hits the top wall, when it hits the top wall for this one, and when it hits the bottom wall for this one. And if you're thinking about these signs, these are kind of arbitrary. If I were to change these around, now they're just going to start in a different direction, but it has the same movement. Okay, but the point is right here. If you hit the wall, you change these values, and that is what you use to set the location of the enemy rectangle. So each one of my enemy rectangle behaves the exact same way, it's just that they start in a different position. Okay, so let's look at some extras. First thing I want to do is let's see if I can make it so that I have some lives here. So maybe I don't die right away. So what I need for that is I'm going to go up here and I'm going to import a counter so that I can show a counter on the screen. And then in my world, I'm going to take any one of these and I'm going to add a counter to the screen. But I'm going to do it a little differently here because I'm going to need to refer to the counter. I'm going to need to change it. I'm going to type public static counter C equals new counter. And I'm going to put C on the screen. So the only difference between all of these and this one is that I've made a counter and I've given it a name. I've named it C. And I'm going to set the value of C to be 3. So look here. And there you go. You can see my counter right there. Now you can argue that's not a great spot for a counter. So you can always change where you're putting the counter. I'm going to put my counter, let's try, it's going to be hard to get out of the way in a game like this, but we'll just put it at 50-20, top left corner. Good enough for now. And then I'm going to change my hero rectangle code. And here you can see this is the key control. And this here is where I check to see if it got hit by an enemy rectangle. So if it gets hit by an enemy rectangle, instead of going to lose world right away, I'm going to take away from the counter. So the counter lives in my world. Control space gets me there's the C, that's the counter's name. And I want to add -1. So what's going to happen now, I'm just going to show you, it's not going to work because I'll run it and you can see it takes me here right away. It's not that I did, oh sorry, I did something wrong. I do want to take this line out for a minute. So I'm going to comment that out for a minute so it doesn't actually, when I comment it out, it means that the computer won't recognize it as code, so that won't happen. But watch what's going to happen here. See that? So it works. The only problem is, look at what happens. I'm going to pause it here. And if I hit this button here, I can run one act cycle. And when I do that, the rectangle is touching, so the enemy rectangle is touching the hero rectangle now, and now, and now, and now, and now. And it's touching it again, and again, and again, and again, and again. And you can see I'm losing all kinds of lives. So what I need to do is say, well, I want to take away a life, but I also only want that to happen once while it's hitting it, right? I don't want to do it again and again and again in that point. So the way I can avoid that is I go to my hero and I say, okay, well, if an enemy hits you, lose a life, but also maybe we change the location of the hero. And the hero's under key control, but we can make a rule saying if it gets hit, oops, we want to set the location to, I'm not sure, we could, and this is where you got to figure out what's best for your game, but maybe we start it back in the top or the bottom corner. I don't know. So what if I put it at like 20, 380? That would be the bottom corner of the screen. So let's just see how that behaves. Oh, see, there we go. So it kind of works. The only problem is if you get hit down here, you're in trouble, but you get the idea. Okay, so if I want to finish that off, then I would say right here, take one away from the counter, which is really counting the lives. But here, I'd say if my world dot c dot get value, and again, if I hit control space, I can see what it's called. There it is, get value. So if I get the value of the counter, and it turns out that it's 0, then the game is over, and I would want to go to lose world. So let's try it now. So I'll get hit here. I lost 1 life, that's good. I'll get hit here, lost a life, that's good. Let's lose 1 more, and you can see the game is over. So just by making those little changes, taking one away from a counter, and then setting the location to a different place so that your player moves when they get hit, and then doing a check to see have we hit 0, then you can change it so that you go to lose world. Another extra that you could put in was a counter that counts the time you've been alive. So I already have a counter class here. I don't need to import that again, but I do need to import a simple timer. So I'm going to import a timer, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my world, and I'm going to make another counter. This time, I'm going to call the counter T for time. And I'm also going to import the simple timer class. So public static simple timer my T equals new simple timer. So hopefully you're starting to get used to this kind of format. And what I'm saying here is I want to use the simple timer class to make a new simple timer called myT. So it's always what class are you using, what do you want to name it, and then what are you doing. This here says make me a new blank simple timer. Okay? And the reason I'm making a counter and a timer is in this case I'm going to use the timer to do the counting behind the scenes in the code, but the counter is what's going to display it to the user. So I'm going to do the same thing I did before, except here I'm going to add the timer counter, T. I'm going to add that at the other side of the screen, and its value initially is going to be 0. So a little too far off the screen. Let's go 550. Okay, there we go. So I have one counter here that counts lives. I have one counter here that counts, one counter here that counts the time. So let's go back to the My World code. I was just wondering why that one was said not. I accidentally didn't put a T here. So T. So I've got to be careful which counter I'm referring to. C is the counter for lives, and T is the counter for time. I'm going to change it a little bit because that's a terrible name. Now that I have two counters especially, that's very confusing. So I'm going to call my lives counter lives because that makes more sense. It's much better code. And then I have to change it in here as well. But that makes more sense. Okay, and now I'm going to figure out how do I make the timer tick. So I'm going to go here, and I want the timer to tick as long as the world is going on. So I want to put an act method in the world. And the reason I want to do that is because I want something to happen over and over and over and over again. So whatever I put in here will be executed again and again and again. Now here, in the constructor that happens once, so this constructor happens as soon as the game begins, and I want to call myT.mark. What that does is it starts the timer over again. And in here, I want to change the value of T, the counter. So I'm going to go T dot set value to something. So here's where I'm going to use the timer to set the value or change the value. And in fact, I'm going to use the word add, like so. So if I were to do this, let's just see what happens. Look at that. So the counter is working, but it's going way too fast. So if I go to my world, this says, okay, on every act cycle, we're going to add 1 to the timer. Or sorry, to the counter. I don't want to confuse people here because this is, again, it's easy to get confused because this is the counter that is working with the timer. The simple timer is called myT. That runs in the background. It keeps the time. The counter on the screen is called T, and that's what the user sees. What I want to do is say if myT.millisElapsed, So if over 1,000 milliseconds have elapsed, that's when I want to add 1 to the counter. So I run it, and you can see that it's not working yet. But if you look really close, look at the start. See? There's a little delay. I'll do it one more time. So I reset, go, and there was a little delay. So it seemed to work at the start, and then it didn't work again. And I want to make that mistake over and over again because that's a very common mistake. When I add 1 to t, I then have to restart the timer by putting that line in there. So this line sets the timer back to 0, and then watch what happens. It's going to start again, and we'll get the desired effect. So I reset, run, 1, 2, 3, and so on. Okay. And so then I have a counter, counts how long I've been alive for, and I also have my lives in the corner. So we're getting there. The last one that I wanted to do was definitely the hardest. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slow these rectangles right down. I'm going to change their move value to 1. And you can see that this game got really easy all of a sudden. Okay, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to speed them up as time goes by. In this case, I'm going to say every enemy rectangle is now going to get its own simple timer. We'll call it T. And this is because we can call it T because this simple timer here has nothing to do with the stuff we have here. This is like giving each of the enemy rectangles its own stopwatch. So I'm going to give each enemy rectangle its own simple timer. And I'm also going to create a constructor. A constructor, remember, only happens once. So the very first time the enemy rectangle gets put on the screen, I want to reset the timer. Okay, so the timer is going to be 0 when the enemy rectangle is on the screen. Now, in the act method, right now we have it moving by these values. So all I'm going to do here is I'm going to say if t dot millis elapsed. So if the number of milliseconds, let's say, gets over 2,000, so if 2 seconds go by, I am going to increase the value of xmove by 1, and I'm going to increase the value of ymove by 1. So the plus plus on the end is short form for saying I want to increase this variable by 1. Okay, so let's just go over it one more time. I've given each enemy rectangle a timer. Every time we act, we check to see if the value of the timer is above 2,000. If it is, we increase the value of ymove and xmove. And also, we are going to reset the timer. What should happen is every 2 seconds, we should see an increase in how fast the rectangles are moving. Okay, so let's see. Well, we have some weird movement. Oh, I think I know why. Check their speed, though. It looks like there's some different movement anyway. Okay, I'm going to pause it. And I just realized my problem. What I want to do is I want to make it faster and faster and faster. So if my xmove value is, let's say, 1, then if I increase it, it's going to go to 2. But I forgot to realize that if my xmove value is -1 and I add, it's going to go to 0. So I've got to add this little statement here that says if my xmove value is currently positive, then yes, I want to add to those values. Actually, I'm going to have to do them independently. So if the xmove value is currently positive, I'm going to add to it to make it even bigger. But if the else, I'm just going to put an else that means if the xmove value, I'll include the whole thing. If the xmove value is negative, well then, to make it faster, I'm not going to add, I'm going to subtract, like that. And I want to do the exact same thing for the y move value as well. So basically, I made a little mistake there. If I have a rectangle that's already moving this way, that means it's going negative. I want to subtract from it to make it go faster. But if it's going this way, it's already positive, the xmove value, so I want to add to it to make it faster. So let's see if that fixes things. So it starts at 1. Oh, there we go. That's sped up. Oh, sped up more. Yeah, it's working. And I'm in some trouble because I'm going to get caught here. So now the game gets quite a bit harder. Oh my goodness. Oh, man. Oh. Ah! Oh, good enough. So it's not too bad to make that work. Again, where'd I go? Sorry, I'm in the wrong spot. So I just had to give every enemy its own timer, and that timer controls the X move and the Y move, simply increasing it and decreasing it as time goes by, and that makes it go faster and faster. So what I'd like you to try is to try to take some of this and incorporate it into your game. See if you can get the lives in there, a time in there, and then see if you can make your enemies go faster. I hope that made sense. If not, you can post any questions in the discussion anytime. Take care.